On the agenda, we have the definition, we have the comparison between threat simulation and emulation, we have the comparison between emulation and pen testing, the frameworks of threat emulation, and lastly, the steps we're going to take. And as always, in addition to that, we're going to discuss a practical scenario. The practical scenario I chose for this subject, which is perfect example, is the room in TryHackMe named Intro to Threat Emulation. This room is part of SOC 2 or SOC Level 2. So if you're doing SOC Level 2, this video is for you. Okay, so I'm going to use the room for the practical scenario. The practical scenario is going to be simulation on both the offensive and the defensive side of threat emulation. Task 5 and Task 6 perfectly fits this purpose. Okay, let's start. So definition of threat emulation. Threat emulation, as you can see, it is a mimicking of real-world attacks based on intelligence and TTPs. That's the hallmark of threat emulation. It is based on intelligence and TTPs. Intelligence is the information gathered through threat intelligence, which is actually a process of gathering data about indicators of compromise based on community feeds, reports, collaborations with other teams, and in addition to incident response engagements or incident response procedures conducted by your organization or by other organizations. All of this data is called intelligence. And in addition to intelligence, we rely also on TTPs. TTP stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. So when we say the term, or when you hear the term TTPs, immediately what comes to mind is the MITRE ATT&CK here, because it is the leading knowledge base on attackers' tactics, techniques, and procedure. So in threat emulation, coming back to the definition, it is the mimicking of real-world attacks through intelligence. Right. Now let's compare threat emulation to threat simulation. What is the difference? So in both cases, we are mimicking, the attacker's tactics, techniques, and procedures, or in other words, the attacker's behavior. What's the difference then? Why emulation and not simulation? Because emulation is a specific. It is specific towards a particular attacker's group. So we call this APT. Attacker groups are called advanced persistent groups if you're talking about sophisticated attacks. So when we do threat emulation, we conduct the threat emulation campaign based on a specific APT, such as APT 37, APT 48, so on and so forth. We select a specific APT group and we conduct the emulation. While on the other hand, simulation, most of the time, it is predefined, meaning we have predefined rules and steps according to which we conduct the threat simulation. Probably, or most of the time, threat simulation, it attempts to be broad, mimicking the behavior and functions of more than one APT. It covers and encompasses more than APT, so it is general. Now let's compare threat emulation with pen testing. What is the difference? So in both cases, or in both processes, we are mimicking the attacker's behavior. So remember, in pen testing, what we do here, in pen testing, we have a team of professionals. These professionals go through typical steps that the attacker would go through in order to demonstrate that a system can be compromised. So what is the difference again between pen testing and emulation? We are mimicking the attacker's steps, behaviors, whatever you want. What's the difference? The difference is that in emulation, it is driven by intelligence, while in pen testing, it is predefined. Again, the same hallmark, the hallmark between emulation and simulation, it stays the same between emulation and pen testing. In pen testing, we have a clear methodology here, clear predefined steps. Usually, it is the cyber kill chain. We set the cyber kill chain as the framework we use to conduct the pen testing, and it is always a clear defined path that we take in order to mimic the attacker's behavior. On the other hand, in emulation, it is not predefined. Nope. It is based on intelligence. So again, in emulation, we set the target APT we want to mimic, and based on that APT's functions, behaviors, and tactics, we conduct the emulation. It's worth mentioning that sorry. In emulation and pentesting, there are common factors. For example, both emulation and pentesting have what is called as the labs. Okay, we have labs, we have tools that we're going to use to conduct the emulation. So in both emulation and pentesting, they share the practical side. In both processes, you're going to use the labs tools to conduct sort of pentesting, you know. So sometimes threat emulation can encompass pentesting, okay, but not 100%. We don't want to say emulation includes pentesting. It includes some parts of pentesting, but not completely pentesting. Okay, now let's go over the frameworks. What are the frameworks and methodologies used in threat emulation? The first one is known by everyone. It is the MITRE ATT&CK. Okay, let's go here and see where it is. So MITRE ATT&CK is the common knowledge base used for conducting all sorts of research on attackers' tactics, techniques, and procedures. As you can see here, these are called the tactics. And as you can see, under every tactic, we have the sub-tactics, or we call them the techniques. These are the techniques that the attackers could use when they conduct their attack. Usually, as you can see, they resemble the steps outlined in the cyber kill chain or the unified kill chain. It starts with reconnaissance, and then it goes through initial access, execution, persistence, so on and so forth. And then the other framework we have is the atomic red testing. Atomic red testing is a library. It is a library of tactics and techniques similar to the MITRE ATT&CK. This is the official page. It's a GitHub repo. The third one is TIBER-EU. TIBER-EU is European framework. It's a European framework for threat intelligence-based ethical red teaming. So it's based, if you are conducting red team engagement and you want it based on threat intelligence, you're going to use the guidelines outlined by the TIBER-EU. How does it work? What is involved in TIBER-EU test? As you can see, it is cross framework between the blue team and the red team and other teams. And the last framework, it is the CTID. So the CTID here, it is Center for Threat Informed Defense. It's a collection of researchers conducted by professionals to guide the process of red team engagements and threat hunting. Okay, so when you conduct red team threat emulation, you will use one or more of these frameworks to guide your campaign. And the five here on the agenda today, we're discussing the steps to conduct a threat emulation campaign. What are the steps? The first one is defining the objective. As said earlier, the objective here is to mimic a certain attacker's group. For example, say your objective is to conduct a threat emulation for an APT, as in this scenario, APT 37. If you go to MITRE ATT&CK and research APT 37, you see this is the main page, the profile of APT 37, and by definition it is a North Korean state-sponsored cyber espionage group that has been active since at least 2012. The group has targeted victims primarily in South Korea, but also in Japan, Vietnam, Russia, Nepal, China, India, Romania, Kuwait, and other parts of the Middle East. The location here is very relevant to your objective. Say your client or the company conducting threat emulation is located outside the jurisdiction or outside the borders of these countries. Here, choosing APT 37 as a primary guideline in your threat emulation might be irrelevant, because this group targets companies or maybe individuals or maybe entities located inside the borders of these countries. Okay, so that's what we mean by defining the objective. We have to define a relevant objective. Another factor in deciding the objective is what APT37 or what is the chosen advanced persistent group targets. What does they target? What are the industries they target? So continuing further with this, APT has been linked with Operation Daybreak, Operation Erebus, Golden Time, Evil New Year, Are You Happy? So North Korean group definitions are known to have significant overlap. The same Laris's group instead of tracking clusters of groups. These are other names. And always when researching a specific group, it's always good to open the ATT&CK navigator. This shows you the dissection of the techniques and the tactics. See, here you have the techniques, and for every technique we have the tactics used by APT37 highlighted in blue. Okay, that's very important when we want to choose, if we want to choose this group as our subject in the threat emulation. Okay, so in going further with this, we see the tools used here. What are the tools? They use blue light, cobalt strike, mimikatz maybe. There is no mimikatz. Okay, so this is the profile of APT37. Now you might be interested in finding out what are the industries targeted by APT37, because again, in defining the objective, we want to choose a perfect prototype or a perfect advanced persistent group to emulate, right? So take into consideration the location that the group targets in addition to the industries that they have chosen as their targets. If you click on the Lazarus group here, we see that it's also North Korean cyber espionage group. And it is said that, look at this, the group has been active since 2009 and was reportedly responsible for the November 2014 destructive wiper attack against Sony Pictures Entertainment. So if your threat emulation campaign is actually focused towards a client of yours in the entertainment industry, this group might be a relevant target for you, or it might be a relevant profile for your threat emulation. Okay, now we set the objective. We set which group you want to emulate. The next thing is setting the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. This is going to be easy because we have already chosen the group, okay, or the groups. Next, what we're going to do, we're going to scroll down, open in the navigator here, and we choose what we want from these tactics. Now, the selection of the techniques here, as you can see, for every technique we have, or every tactic we have many or more than 5 techniques used by the APT group. So you're not gonna emulate all of these, right? It's gonna be overwhelming and non-practical. What you're going to do is check with the organization or your client or the company for which you're conducting the emulation campaign, and see which tactics or which techniques might be relevant to the organization depending on their infrastructure, on the tools, and on their processes, right? So for example, say that the organization doesn't use Python in their environment. So emulating Python or choosing Python as one of the techniques used in the execution, it's going to be irrelevant, right, to your exercise. That's how you're going to rule out or rule in the techniques. So we selected the TTPs, and the third step is the planning. In the planning here, we start to come into contact with one of the steps that intersect with pen testing. Here we're going to select the scope, the rules of engagement. All of these will be outlined in the planning. We're going to select the scope, what are the processes, who are the departments, and what are the servers or the endpoints that we're going to target in the threat emulation, right? We're gonna set the rules of engagements. Who's gonna conduct what? Who's gonna monitor what, right? Who is authorized to conduct the emulation? We can also set the reporting. Sorry for the handwriting because I'm using the mouse. Reporting. We can also select the communication channels, appropriate communication channels through which we're gonna report the results. Okay, after we have planned for everything, we're gonna start the process. We're gonna conduct the emulation. Okay, in here we're gonna choose the labs, the tools, according to what? Again, according to the groups that we have specified. For example, going back to OPT37, as you can see in softwares, they have used Cobalt Strike. So in your emulation group or in emulation campaign, you're gonna choose Cobalt Strike as your C2 tool. You can also use these tools, if not some or all of these tools, to conduct your threat emulation. And again, during the conduction phase, you're going to come across many of the steps that are cross-referenced in pentesting. Lastly, communication and reporting. You're going to create a report and deliver the findings to your client or to your company, where you outline what are the weak areas and how the security posture can be improved. Okay, now let's take a look at the room and go over the tasks. So we said that we're going to cover task 5 and task 6 because they contain the simulation through the view site. Let's go over this. Okay, there are 2 rounds, each round comprising each round comprising of 3 questions related to specific strategy. Okay, so we have 2 rounds. Okay, every round contains 3 questions which are going to answer. In these 2 rounds, we are kind of doing the job of the threat emulation team. Let's go over the questions first. Assuming you are emulating Carbon Spider. Carbon Spider is an APT. Carbon Spider. It is Fin 7. Okay, assuming we are emulating Carbon Spider now, what will you use to achieve execution techniques? Okay, how are you going to answer this question? We're going to assume that we are doing threat emulation. We chose our target, or we chose the APT profile we're going to emulate. We're going to go over the techniques used. How? We're going to click on view and open the navigator, and here we see the techniques, the tactics, and the techniques for every tactic. So in the execution, we have 14 techniques, among which we have command and scripting interpreter, JavaScript, PowerShell, Visual Basic, Windows Command Shell. As you can see, we have many of them. But in the scenario here, we're gonna use only some of them. So among the choices, we have cron, AppleScript, Management Instrumentation, and Windows Command Shell. Let's compare this with the existing techniques here. Command and scripting interpreter. Okay, JavaScript doesn't exist. PowerShell, Visual Basic, Command Shell exists. Schedule task, malicious file, and link, they don't exist. So we only have Windows Command Shell. While emulating Carbon Spider, what will be used to achieve persistence? Back to the persistence tactic. Under persistence, we have 20 techniques, among which we have registry run keys, startup folders, and we have other techniques, Windows servers, application shimming. As you can see, guys, there are many techniques under every tactic. It's gonna be non-practical if you attempt to emulate all of this, right? Alternatively, you're going to choose what are the techniques that fit the scenario. The scenario, we have 4 from which we're going to choose: launch daemon, login items, Windows servers, and schedule task. Remember, we have 2 here. We have schedule task. Let's see here. Windows service. Okay, that's one is applicable. And we have registry keys, startup folder. This may cover schedule tasks, but let's see what else. Launch daemon is ruled out because it's not used. So we have Windows service or schedules. Select Windows service. It's not the correct answer. then it's a scheduled task. Okay, there is a POS malware that Carbon Spider has been known to use to harvest credit card data. What is it? Now we're going to discuss the tools they used. So in the tools or the software, we have these tools that were reported to be used by this group. Some of these tools are part of or community created tools, such as Cobalt Strike, right? And we have TryHackMe. It is created by the community. But other tools are not created by the community, such as Pillowmint, maybe Maze. So Pillowmint here, it is said that it is used to archive collected data, which fits the question here. So we're going to select Pillowmint. And lastly, please use special ability to completely destroy. So you're going to click on the bubbling, moving ball here. Click on this. Okay, Finn's ransomware program is, select one of them. Probably it's in the description here. If you go up, you can see that in Finn's, they shifted operations to a big game hunting approach, including use of REvil ransomware and their own ransomware as a service, Dark Side. So it is Finn's ransomware. REvil is a known ransomware, but it is not Finn's, right? So it is Dark Side. Round 2 now. 1, 2, 3, fight. Assuming you are emulating Reaper, what will we use to achieve initial access techniques? Back to the navigator. Reaper. So Reaper is APT37. What are we going to use for initial access? Okay, open the navigator and go to initial access. In initial access, we have 10 techniques. We have drive-by compromise, we have spear phishing attachment, command and scripting interpreter exploitation for client external APIs. Okay, so here, spear phishing and drive-by compromise. Since spear phishing is not clearly defined what it is, as stated in the techniques here, we have attachment, link, service. Which one? Not stated. So we're going to stick with drive-by compromise as shown here. Reaper's command and control plan utilizes dog call malware. Which platform would be used to deploy dog call? So dog call probably is one of the tools here used by this group. This is dog call. Click on this, and as you can see, which platform used to deploy dog call in the command control phase. So in the techniques used here, I'm gonna select this web service by directional communication. And in the use, it is stated that dog call is capable of leveraging cloud storage APIs such as Cloud, Box, Dropbox, and Yandex. The one that fits the description in here, it is the Dropbox. If you were Reaper, I am not, which defense evasion technique would you use to hide information? Back to the friend navigator. I'm gonna go to defense evasion. We have 43. That's overwhelming. Bypass user account control, invalid code signature, obfuscated files or information. So here, obfuscated files information can be used for this, but not to, it can be used to hide information, but more specifically, it is used to obfuscate by obfuscation. What clearly fits the definition of hiding is steganography. So we're going to answer with steganography here. And the bubble, the floating bubble here, special ability, come here, click. Okay. Initial 0-day abuse by Reaper was found on the software. So which software was found to have 0-day and exploited by this group? It is one of these. You can find this in the Reaper. Going back to Reaper. Let's see what software they exploited here. Open the navigator again. And we see in the execution exploitation for client access. Okay. It is sorry, it's ID T1203. So if you go here, I'm going to look for this one. These are the CVEs they exploited. Okay, I'm gonna find which one from here. Oh no, go back. I'm going to go back, and from here we can see that they have exploited Flash Player, Word, Internet Explorer, and Microsoft Edge. Not Dropbox, not binary padding, not pCloud, but Adobe Flash. And this wraps up this task. Okay, from which you can find the flags. The emulation plan component determining which activities are to be conducted is known as the scope. Okay, in the last simulation here, we're going to click on view site, task 6, and the same, we have 2 rounds, 3 questions, but this time we are taking on the roles of, or the role of blue teams. So, while conducting threat emulation plan, remember guys that the blue team is sitting down and observing what you're doing. That's what we're going to do now. While defending against APTs, what mitigation measure would you use to prevent command and scripting techniques? Now, let me say it out loud that you can answer these questions here without the need for the MITRE. But if you want to answer using MITRE, you can go to defenses, mitigations, and enterprises. We want to defend against command and scripting techniques. So these are the security measures. Which one to select depends on the technique. So here we are defending against command and scripting techniques. We have to select from password policies, privileged account management, anti-malware, and execution prevention. Without going through all of this, you can simply answer with execution prevention, because it is the security measure through which you can control the execution of executables and scripts. You can prevent the execution of certain scripts using this mitigation. Okay, how would you mitigate against data loss through ransomware encryption? It's very clear that it is data backup, because through backups, you can restore your business operations by going through the backups and selecting the most recent one. What is the most efficient method used for exfiltration? This one can be tricky, but again, it's going to be answered simply. So, which one? Let's start with using covered channels such as DNS or ICMP. In some organizations, ICMP is blocked. So, this leaves you with DNS. DNS or exfiltration through DNS has been used widely by many advanced persistent groups, and there are many detection rules that have been created to spot and eliminate this tactic. So it's very easily, it can be used, but the question is asking you to come up with the most efficient one. It is efficient, DNS, yes, because DNS cannot be blocked in an organization network. It must be used, so you can use it to exfiltrate data, but it is not the most efficient. It can be detected easily. Using USB drives, not practical, because you're not going to risk your life and go to any organization's office to just steal data using USB drives, unless it is a physical pen test. Hiding data in images or other file types, practical using steganography, yes, but still, there are limitations on the amount of data you can transfer using steganography. An image of size 1 megabyte cannot hold data of worth of 1 gigabyte. Using email or file transfer protocols, totally not efficient, because email is strictly censored and monitored in any organizations. There are limitations on the size of files or attachments that you can use here. So this leaves us with uploading files to cloud storage services. There are countless websites which you can use to upload data. So you can upload the data that you have exfiltrated to Dropbox, Yandex, Google Drive. These are definitely not blocked in an organization. They can be blocked, but mostly they are not. And the floating bubble special ability. The first, ransomware, that leveraged worm-like capability is known as, look at the choices here. They are very, very clear. They are not the answers, right? Not backup, not DNS, not cloud storage. This leaves you with WannaCry, which is very known as a ransomware. Round 2, fight. When emulating an SQL injection attack, what indicators in web server logs can suggest it is successful? So you are a SOC analyst and you are reviewing the web server logs. You want to see if you want to spot indicators of compromise that suggest that there is an ongoing SQL injection attack. What you will choose here. Now, errors and abnormal queries can be indicators, but not totally, because if you have a website that receives a lot of traffic, you might see errors in the web server logs, even SQL errors. And sometimes you don't. It's not supposed to see these errors, because you should see the errors of database errors are actually stored in database logs. You shouldn't see them in web server logs. Now this one, presence of SQL syntax in logs. That's out loud telling you there is an SQL injection attack, because SQL injection attacks take place not only through database queries, but also through the web apps. If you put some SQL queries in search boxes or comment areas, you're going to see them in the web server logs. So if you see these, there is someone attempting SQL injection attack. What kind of web server logs would effectively indicate brute force attacks during the emulation and detection? This is going to be easy, I know, because if you see multiple failed login attempts, you're going to suppose there is someone attacking your service. That's partially true, not totally, because they have to come from the same IP address to indicate that there is someone attempting this. Now, there might be more than someone, so still increase in failed login attempts is an indicator. Don't skip it if you see it. But here we are fitting the answers to be in line with the scenario here. We have a better answer, that these attempts coming from the same IP address. Now, if there is an attacker group randomizing their IP addresses using different IP for every attempt, it's going to be difficult to spot the attacker, but it's going to be easy to spot that there is an ongoing attack, because increase in failed login attempts, especially outside of the working hours. And file inclusion attacks would be detected using which artifacts in web server logs or web server logs. Okay, file inclusion attacks. So in file inclusion, remember that the attacker's attempt is to access resources using the URL. So in the first answer here, or the first choice, presence of path traversal syntax in logs. What is path traversal? So path traversal here, it is when you append these strings in the URL, 2 dots slash 2 dots slash 2 dots slash, and then maybe the name of the file you're attempting to access. An example would be etc, and you know the rest, right? Password. Handwriting is bad because I'm using the mouse. Okay, so if you see presence of path traversal, if you see this pattern in the web server logs, you will conclude that there is path traversal attack taking place, and therefore file inclusion, because file inclusion's end goal is to reveal the contents of sensitive data. The floating bubble, let me catch it. Which group was responsible for breaches due to the exploitation of the Outlook web app? This requires you to take the name of every single group here and look it up in the MITRE ATT&CK. So I have done the job here for you guys, and it is Hafnium. So if you research Hafnium here and select this, scrolling down to the list of techniques, going to open the navigator, you see here it is responsible for breaches due to the exploitation. It's going to go to initial access, okay, exploit public-facing apps. You see there is mention of Microsoft. If you go back here to techniques, it's the same, but not in the navigator. We scroll down to exploit public-facing apps. We see Hafnium has exploited CVE in Log4j and other CVEs to compromise on-premises version of Microsoft Exchange Server, where actually Outlook is part of this suit. So it is the answer is Hafnium. And that concludes the scenarios. Okay, you want the answers for other tasks. Let's go over these. What can be defined as an intelligence-driven impersonation of real-world attacks? It is emulation. What is the exercise of representing adversary functions through predefined and automated attack patterns? It is simulation. See, the end here is to emulate the attacker's behavior, but we have different ways to do it. You can use simulation, you can use emulation, you can use pen testing. It's up to you, or up to the environment or the requirement of your client. Under TIBER-EU, under which phase would engagement and scoping fall? You can find the answer by opening the document, or as the room author thanks and credit to them, you can see that they have outlined the steps for you. In TIBER, you have 3 phases: preparation, testing, and closure. The question is referring to the preparation phase. What is the library that provides technical emulation tests based on TTPs? It is Atomic Red Team. There is a set of 3 software used by Fin 6 and 7. Can you identify them? Answers are in alphabetical order. What you're going to do, you're going to open the profile of Fin 6 and Fin 7 in Entity and CK, right? Scroll down to software and find the common tools used between or across these 2 profiles. You're going to find that this is the answer. And lastly, which factor will be considered when analyzing whether to use existing or custom tools during the emulation? Remember, guys, that in the emulation, we have to go through the steps. In going through the steps, we're going to conduct the emulation. By conducting the emulation, we are choosing the tools and the labs. The preference or the choice of what tools to use depends on the organization and the complexity of the TTP here. You might use the tools used by the APT group or develop custom tools. And that concludes the room. Thank you guys for watching, and I'm gonna see you in the next video.